You are now entering the horror sanctum.
Hello and welcome back to the Horror Sanctum podcast. I'm Jay with John and TJ. And this week we're joined by actor, writer, and producer Frank Farrell, who I think you're best known for Street Trash and Spookies, which are two great cult films. I like them both. I adore Street Trash. I can't explain why, but I do. So thank you for taking some time with us and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And let's see, are you seeing me on video? Because right now I'm just seeing you guys. I haven't switched to a view with myself, so I just want to confirm that I'm appearing.
We see.
Okay.
We see.
All right, then we're good. Great to meet you all, and thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, Thanks. Frank. And I think we first connected on social media, and I was just so glad to see the resurgence of Spookies finally getting some attention in recent years.
Quite something.
Getting on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs and getting on some streaming services. And Street Trash has always been, it's maybe my favorite exploitation type.
Really? I mean, I think it's one of the great exploitation films myself. And I guess you know somewhat that there were issues with the making of Spookies, but with Street Trash, I think there were a lot of reasons it turned out, I feel, as well as it did. I think the director was getting financing through his dad's connections, so he had a lot of leeway in terms of probably going a little further than if we'd been under really strict financial control. So that added to it. But I just think also that it was packed with creative people. It has it's like occasionally I'll read things saying, "Oh, this film is terrible. The photography is terrible. The acting is terrible," and it's like, oh, wait a minute. I really beg to differ. It's like photography is way above average for a film of this sort, and editing. And so I feel somewhat defensive of that. In Spookies, I feel more defensive of a lot of the creature creations almost than anything else, because the actual scenes are totally recut and in many cases really pretty much ruined by what was done to them.
So maybe let's kind of bring it back chronologically, because I know in looking at your filmography, you were the Seltzer Ghost, not Ghost, Zombie. Seltzer Zombie.
All right, well now there's a part I have to try for.
Oh, well, hey, you could use your reel from Dawn of the Dead to be the Seltzer Ghost later, and maybe a new Paranormal Activity 7.
Oh yeah, I mean that was I went with one of my partners from Spookies, Brendan Faulkner. We went out on location where they were shooting Dawn of the Dead, 12 hours drive in a blizzard to get to the mall from New York, and it was really worth it because I mean it was. I had been a big fan of Night of the Living Dead for many years, and to even know this was happening was very exciting. And then just to hear, oh well, they need zombies. If you just show up, you'll probably get into the picture.
Yeah, it's a shame they don't really that whole Pittsburgh crew with George Romero and everything. It's a shame that they don't really have. Since Romero's passing,
well, I mean, they don't have
that.
They don't have someone to be centered around in that sense. I mean, there's still filmmaking going on there, just like there is almost everywhere, for in any country in the world right now.
Yeah.
But the fact is that he was really at the center of the Pittsburgh scene.
For sure. And there's still film school out there that Tom Savini has.
Oh yeah.
And we've known had some people on the show that's graduated from, I think, both sides of that. So tell us how you got into filmmaking. Were you already into filmmaking when you did the zombie
I got very
thing?
into movies in general around the age of maybe 11 or 12. And that was, initially through the, whatever movies I could watch on TV at the time, which was mostly much older movies. So I became a big fan of basically all of film history, of everything from the beginning through today. I'm always fascinated by how things are done, and what how things have changed over the years. And I like the early days of filmmaking just in terms of like a historical interest, because it was like they were sort of making everything up as they went along, and there was anything was likely to work or not work.
Yeah, yeah, kind of like the guy that did the Man in the Moon picture that Martin Scorsese did the movie about.
Oh yeah, George Méliès, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, George Méliès. Yeah, some of that stuff was like, was like real magic back in the day.
Right, and I can really imagine, like at the time when it was still such like absolutely like unheard of technology that you were pioneering in, it must have been really exciting to be a part of something like that.
Or terrifying. The first film they ever showed, I think, was at like a World's Fair, and it was just a train coming into
Right,
the
yeah, that's a
camera.
famous story that people ran because they were worried they'd be run over, but it's believable. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but it is believable.
It's a good story. So tell us how you first got involved with Spookies, which I know didn't start
Well, I
out
mean,
as Spookies.
from the time I was 11 or 12, I got very interested in film. At one point, I was a film collector. I collected on 8 millimeter, 16 millimeter before the days of video commonly being available. Um, and I got my first home movie camera at the age of like 11, 12, something like that. And immediately wanted to make like horror movies, and and like so many other people, I think wind up being inspired. But what really started to give me some direction to go in is I had a good situation in high school where there was actually a filmmaking class that was offered, which I took for a couple of years, made some award-winning short films, and found some footing and a sense that, yeah, maybe I should do this. This is like I really love it, and people like my work so far. So I continued. I eventually hooked up at the State University at Purchase, New York, in Westchester County, where I grew up more or less. I met a couple of guys, Brendan Faulkner and Tom Doran, in one of the classes there, which was actually taught by Roy Frumkes, who was the central producer on Street Trash and wrote the script. And we hit it. I hit it off with Roy, and I hit it off with them. So I wound up eventually making films with both of them.
And he wasn't all that much older than most of the crew, right? Roy?
He was about 10 years older than I was at the time. So although, I mean, he was, no, I mean, in terms of the crew, for instance, on Street Trash, a lot of that crew was like students who were still like 19, 20 years old. So Roy was maybe 15 years older than a lot of them. I wouldn't know precisely, but I mean, that was a production where we had a lot of newcomers and people who were working for the first time in positions on the crew, but we also had people heading up almost every department that were experienced, that were professional, that could guide that process.
Yeah. So he didn't have anything to do with Spookies, though, right?
Jimmy did work on Spookies. And this is like a horrible thing to have to admit, but he he worked on Spookies. There was originally a prologue in Spookies, right?
Okay.
That happens before any of the other characters are at the house, and that was chopped out, and the scene with Billy and the birthday party was put in.
Okay.
And essentially, they pardon me here. Let me think. I'm just trying to. What was I saying? I'm juggling a few thoughts here.
So the characters that we first meet that are driving in the cars trying to get there's a pre-scene before that.
Right, and it was shot, and it was edited, and it was in the film until we left it, and then it was eventually gone. So gosh, I had a larger point which I can't recall at the moment, but the fact is that, as you know, I mean, if you said you looked at the documentary.
Yeah, I watched the documentary.
Yeah, I think that probably gives as clear a picture as you're likely to get, although there's plenty more that could have gone into it in terms of information. It here's what I was going to say. Jimmy Muro worked on Spookies. I mean, I brought him onto the crew, and he was there working with us, and he had already acquired a Steadicam at that point. This is before Street Trash, and he was going to shoot stuff for us. I mean, we planned to use it. and he did not get along with our Ken Kelch, our director of photography. And Ken's like a really he was then, and he still is a respected director of photography. He's like Abel Ferrara's go-to guy for many of his films. So he shot all kinds of TV and movies in the New York area primarily. But he and Jimmy just like somehow like there was a big clash there, and it literally came down to, all right, we either have to get rid of our director of photography or we have to lose our Steadicam. And I'm glad Jimmy didn't hold anything against me, because he brought me onto Street Trash subsequently. But it was frustrating. I mean, it was frustrating for me, especially because this was my first full-fledged feature film, and it was important to me that people got along. In fact, I hired a lot of people based on what seemed to be the fact that they were reasonable people.
So at what point did Vipco become a part of the
Myself
production?
and Tom and Brendan, my two partners, we were looking around for financing for something. We had several projects that we did in various situations. We did a trailer for one thing. We did a teaser for another. We started shooting an anthology film, which we thought we could just do one story at a time. And the problem is, especially when you're working very low budget and you've got minimal capital and you're trying to get more, is that if something else comes along and some money is possibly available to do something else, suddenly you're doing a whole other project because it's possible to do that, and the other thing has to be on hold. So that we went through a lot of that. And Spookies was really a matter of we had a few people we knew. One of them was Jennifer Aspinall, who was one of our effects people, who was on Spookies and Street Trash, and later became an Emmy award-winning makeup artist, and whose work I've always admired. She apparently had worked briefly on a film this guy Michael Lee, who was the head of Vipco, had tried to make in the UK, and started to make and did shoot a substantial portion of. And in fact, it's in the documentary where it says he made this film with Terry Marcel, who was like a somewhat known British director at the time, and what was there was just like awful. And my partner Tom Doran was brought over. I still can't believe Michael actually paid for this, but he flew him over to screen the movie so that he could get an opinion on it. This is before it was easy to get quick video transfers or just send something over the internet or anything else. So he went over and he looked at it, and we hear from him, and it's like, all right, it's terrible, like really terrible. I don't know what makes sense. So somehow this turned into us convincing him that we should start another film for him. And we had an idea we had started to put together. We had actually done a 16 millimeter short, promo piece for it. And we tried to say, all right, we're doing this. We're planning to shoot 16 millimeter. We have something already shot. So that right there, you're saved some portion of the cost. But he insisted he wanted to do his own type of movie, which was, to be blunt, he just wanted to do a rip-off of The Evil Dead. He said that, I want to do a film just like The Evil Dead. And we didn't want to do a film that was just like anybody's film. We don't want to, that was not our goal, is to make rip-off movies of one sort or another. But we had to sort of play along to whatever extent. I think the only ideas he really had came from other films he had watched or had seen, and he had become aware that because he would go to the film markets every year to buy films for his own company. So films that he knew had made money, he would try and rip off this or that. And that's how a lot of European plagiarism has always been, especially with like Italian movies from the 80s, where like anything that's suddenly like of note in some film, they will rip off in 15 different ways with no context necessarily, but just because they say, oh, this is a good idea and this film made money.
Yeah, and then make 12 versions of it and just slightly change
more or less. Yeah. But the thing is, I feel ultimately Spookies wound up becoming, through its re-editing, almost that kind of a film. It's like so many Italian movies that I really enjoy watching that have almost no coherency whatsoever. You just have to sort of go along and hope there's at least something happening to keep your attention. Um, but it's part of what I think now has made Spookies somewhat popular with people who have, especially who have either known it before, but also a lot of people who have discovered it for the first time with its Blu-ray release. But it has like a dreamlike quality because nothing makes really that much sense. Things are sort of loosely connected. I think a lot of people dislike it not primarily because it's a film you can't watch it and expect like any of the plot to go coherently from one step to the next. It's like you'll be in the middle of a scene and then suddenly it cuts to a completely different character and something else is going on and the thing you were just watching is gone. It's like you just have to go with it.
And then suddenly there's monsters of all sorts.
Right. Well,
just killing everybody.
The monsters keep everything going because our original intention when we realized the kind of film we were being hired to make and we weren't going to turn down the opportunity, it was really just, all right, we just got to keep the monsters coming and they have to be different and, they can't be just absolutely expected or typical. And I think that element always worked. I think it's less effective in the finished film because strangely, for reasons I've never understood, a lot of the actual effects portions of those scenes are cut out. Especially, I mean, my favorite scene is the Spider Woman sequence, and that was reduced probably to like 50% or less of what it was. And things like multiple smaller spiders attacking the guy who's in the scene, more transitions of the spider, a full grown actual spider. I don't understand. I mean, I can't think of what the explanation is.
So strange. So in your words, because I know a lot of people are curious, even people who have seen the movie, what would you say is the plot of Spookies?
The original plot of Spookies was, and to bear in mind, this was not our desired plot. It was what we more or less were able to translate from the elements he demanded be there. Well, first of all, he demanded the characters all be teenagers. And we didn't want to just do another clone movie where all the characters are teenagers. So we just cast mostly actors we knew, people of different ages. We just went with what seemed sensible to do. But we really wound up, I think, in a position that we had no way to like really refuse to do the things he wanted, but we tried to gear them in directions that maybe were a little more appealing or we thought were more interesting or visually worked, whatever it came down to.
I'm more curious about, because I've seen it many times. I'm curious, is the main bad guy who's trying to bring, I guess, his dead wife back to life?
Creon, no, that's in no way part of our movie.
Okay, that wasn't intended to be part of your movie.
What was added was him as the central villain of the piece. Anything related to him, the Catman, the Billy with his birthday party at the beginning, the drifter he meets outside who starts to bury him. Which in my theory, here's my theory. I think that scene may be the only reason the movie got an R rating at its time of release, because there's nothing in it that's R rated. There's barely any blood. Most of the deaths take place in sort of sanitized ways. Mm-hmm. So I can't think of anything else. I do know at the time that's the kind of anything kind of cruelty to children was very much frowned upon.
Yeah. I just assumed it was probably a PG because, like you said, that everything happens very sanitized. One of the things we were told to do is because we originally wanted to go a little further with gore and things like that, and the backer was very adamant about that because he had trouble. He was sort of at the center of the video nasties controversy in the 80s, where he really he risked getting jailed and getting fined, and even though he kept buying these sleazy like Italian and Spanish horror movies that he was making a lot of money with. And to quote and to bring it back to another New York filmmaker, Abel Ferrara, who famously made The Driller Killer. It was a cover that Vipco
I'm pretty
released
sure
of
that
The Driller Killer that
was one of
created the
his
whole
early.
Video Nasties craze.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, he sort of became like the central figure, I think, in a lot of that, just because he was someone smart enough, well, I guess according to him at least, smart enough to get into buying these things, at an early stage, developing relationships and being able to buy several of them, every year, and continue developing various the whole horror market was, I guess, probably relatively undeveloped compared to anything certainly that exists today.
So one thing I was curious about with
Yeah.
Spookies, and I know you mentioned this in another interview, you mentioned about a horror anthology that you were working on, and Wes Craven was attached. Can you?
That was Tales That Will Tear Your Heart Out was the name of it. It was done under the auspices of the State University at Purchase, which I mentioned earlier. That is, that we had a film class going there, and it was Roy Frumkus initiated that. He thought it would be an idea to try and do a film with a student crew and bring the students into it as closely as possible. And he thought an anthology was a way to go. So he picked several students, including myself and my partner, Brendan Faulkner, who went on to make Spookies with me, and a couple of other students. And then he also brought in professionals. And Wes Craven, this is after Wes Craven had done Last House on the Left, but before he did Nightmare on Elm Street, or really became as well known as he was to become eventually. And
because y'all were filming in '84 and it wasn't released till '86.
No, we were shooting in closer to 79 or 80 on that, actually.
Oh,
So,
really?
so does footage exist of this anywhere, or
It
is
does.
it just kind of
It
out
does.
there?
Some of it. The film Dr. Butcher, M.D. contains title sequences. Dr. Butcher is the Italian movie Zombie Holocaust.
Oh,
It
sure.
contains title sequences in the English language version, which are scenes from Tales That Will Tear Your Heart Out, directed by myself and Brendan, which were at the time, without our being aware of it until after the fact, were sold by Roy, who was in possession of them, to Aquarius Releasing, who distributed the movie. And and this was after the anthology looked like it was dead. But so retroactively, I had my big screen debut with something that I made at the age of 19, which was kind of cool.
So what's interesting about the movie with Spookies is it is a tale of two. It's what you guys shot, and then it's what was done after, right? And one thing I noticed in the movie was there are some scenes that like Carol being possessed,
Right,
where she's talking, and then you see Creon talking. And I thought to myself, what the original edit of that, was there someone else speaking those? Like, how did that sync
the
up?
original edit was just that she becomes possessed by a demon that is controlling the other demons who are. I mean, you see it in some of the early shots, especially of the Ouija board, where there are creatures, on the board, these images of the various creatures. And the conceit at a certain point becomes that she's, basically sitting there with the board, working the board to bring up these creatures.
Okay, so the dialogue that's with Creon and all that was never anything.
That was all added. His Creon's voice, I think, is dubbed over her visual figure in a couple of scenes, if I remember.
Okay, so at that point, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point when he comes in and like you said, the Catman and all that, all are not. You're out of that at that point. You're just like watching it.
Yeah, I could go on at length about how I think the whole thing was a situation where somebody took advantage of the what they saw as a chance to get a directing credit and turn the film into something else specifically for that purpose, not because her original claim was that the film was unreleasable as it was, which is really ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's got a lot of charm about it, and like you said, the practical effects, and it's interesting because I know that I could imagine it's probably not what you and the people you're working with envision, but it is funny now in 2023, like films like this are kind of like a lost treasure because
No, I know that, and
yeah,
that's it's only in recent years since the release of the Blu-ray really that the film has gotten enough attention to really even make it something that more than one or two people here and there even knew about. For years, people would ask me what I made, and I'd say Spookies, and of course the answer was, oh, I never heard of it.
right. Yeah, I
And,
mean, I remember seeing the VHS when I was younger and
yeah.
seeing clips of the effects, and I was like, wow, what is this? Um, and I know that after, I don't know if you have anything to do with this, but I had to ask. There was a movie. It was called Killer Dead, aka non-veg. So you know what this is? It's
How could I
non-vegetarian
not know
zombies.
what this is?
So what is the deal with that? It's like a spiritual sequel to
No, well, first of all,
Spookies.
you're going. All right, man, I could go on at length, right? And it's like, it's and because I don't know enough to keep my mouth shut. I'll just say anything that fine. Uh, Killer Dead is a movie that was directed and produced by one of my two Spookies partners. The other was Tom Doran. Brendan Faulkner, shortly after we made Spookies, decided to do a $50,000 or thereabouts zombie movie called Killer Dead, and he did. The only issue is that it never officially got finished for many years, like
Mm.
many years, so we're talking like 1986 or something like that, 87 to now. Uh, it got eventually it did get finished in some form, and it was bought by a couple of countries other than the USA, and it did go out there as non-vegetarian zombies from outer space, and and something else I forget, something like Plateau of the Dead or something. I think there was an Argentinian release with a cover done by Tom Molinelli, who was art director for both Spookies and Street Trash.
Wow. Yeah, Vinegar
And
Syndrome needs this movie.
well, here's the thing: Vinegar Syndrome has essentially made that clear to Brendan that they wanted it. And I mean, I don't know what to say. I can't speak for him. He has, over all this time, for many years, I was heard, oh, it's being finished, or some new scene is being shot, or, I mean, currently, supposedly special effects need to be redone, but it does not have any, as far as I know, definite release date. It might sometime soon. I don't know enough about anything, and I think at this point, it's valuable mostly as a piece of film history. In that it contains a lot of the same cast and crew as Spookies.
Yeah, one thing one thing I did want to ask, and I know Jay and TJ and Jay have some more stuff they want to talk about, but with Street Trash, I rewatched it again, and the thing that really sticks out to me about that movie is not really it's not really the effects, it's not the melting, it's not all the stuff people talk about. There is a vibe to that movie, a creepy vibe that I just was like, so, I mean, it's really impressive.
I agree with, and I understand what you're saying, and I've always felt more or less the same thing, because I think the whole film, it's not just the melting. Yeah, the melting seems to go, beyond just like blood effects, but at the same time, our attitude was, I mean, we went without, there was no rating on the film because we would have received an X rating, right?
Right.
But our logic was, all right, wait a minute, we're going to receive an X rating because some guy is like spouting blue and yellow. I mean, what are you relating that to? Blood? It's not blood. So it was kind of perplexing, but the film would have gotten an X rating for a lot of other stuff in it. In the meantime, there was a conscious effort. Not, I wouldn't say to be offensive. I would simply just say to be outrageous and not to hold back if an idea occurred where because they're for the average movie, you come up with certain ideas and you go, oh, well, I could never do that because either the audience wouldn't accept it, or you'd be arrested in some county somewhere, or whatever it comes down to.
So there was definitely a conversation with.
Oh, there were lots of conversations, but it wasn't like we're sitting there like, oh, how can we be offensive or disgusting or outrageous? It was more like, if an idea occurred and it was creative or funny, and people, from all of the production got to voice a lot of their ideas in many cases, and ideas were and suggestions were taken all the time. But I think that's something that contributed to it. Jim Muro was a first time director, but he was very open to like working with everybody, and he was he ultimately wound up with, I think, what is a really damn good first feature film.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there's something about it there's a lot of things like with PTSD and Vietnam, and
Right.
I just really think that's kind of overlooked in the history of that movie. It's almost like people think it's just a trauma movie, which it is similar to that.
Right,
But
but
there's a
it
lot
has
more.
it has that reputation for several reasons, and this includes the way Lloyd Kaufman apparently looks at it, which is he supposedly was he got, first of all, there were there are contradictory stories I've heard, but I was told that he felt that like Street Trash sort of ripped off his style from his early trauma films, and the fact is, when we were making Street Trash, I don't even know if The Toxic Avenger had yet been released exactly, and none of us had seen any of those films. And we wound up using some of the same people he cast in trauma movies because they're New York actors and they came to us and they auditioned. So I mean, we just we cast as we chose. We didn't try to ape trauma in any way. I think the similarity is that they're both sort of casually excessive, intentional, not casually exactly, but intentionally and without necessarily causing it to seem even so offensive. A lot of it is done sort of casually, but I think more so in Street Trash. I don't think we were, aside from the melting scenes, which we thought would be like really different. I don't think there was an attempt made for to get the audience upset or anything. But we knew we came up with some extreme stuff. It was just that we didn't put any holds on pretty much anything.
So, the question I know anyone who's seen Street Trash and might recognize you from the film is dying to know is everything okay down there? Did you get that thing reattached?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I did a personal appearance in Asheville, North Carolina, about 3 weeks ago at the Orbit DVD video store. It's a very popular
Yes, yeah,
video
very good.
location in that area. Yeah, they were really great. And they brought me a penis at one point and made me pose with it. And it was severed and bloody.
Oh, wonderful. Did y'all
Yeah.
play hot potato with it?
No, it's been suggest. I mean, I did my first convention nearby there. I was also doing the CreepyCon in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it's been suggested to me, and it's been offered by people I know who do effects work that we could make some penises, and then you could sell them and sign them. And it's like I can't see doing that at some convention where there are kids running around, and it's like I've got a dildo shop on my table.
There's probably a market for it. Just saying.
Oh, I know. I'm guaranteeing you. I actually I mentioned this to somebody who said they would buy one, so I thought, we'll see.
So, what do you think the legacy of Street Trash is today for people like our generation who discovered it
Well, it's
later,
interesting
really
because
after on
out of the two
DVD?
films we've been talking about, they both came. Their notoriety is very different in terms of the path taken. Street Trash has pretty much always been around since the time it was released, and it's slowly, almost from the start, it started to get attention from the people who would like that kind of thing. But as years went by, especially I think after it went on to DVD, at a certain point, it just became well known enough so that it became sort of an institution on its own. And that's really either has happened or is on the verge of happening with Spookies, and that so many people are now familiar with it that weren't at one time. And at the same time, so many other people just really will go on and on about it, how it was a valuable part of their childhood, and it encouraged their interest in the genre. And I've had so many other people say that they were inspired about it, inspired by it to go into makeup or to go into filmmaking themselves, and that means a lot.
Absolutely. And the special effects, really the creature effects on Spookies, and then the special effects, the melting effects on Street Trash, they still hold up today with
It's amazing.
anything.
They mostly do, and even though the truth is, on both films there were a lot of unexpected problems because a lot of this stuff we were working, on Spookies. I mean, we had people who were very talented, but they were still at the beginning of their careers and still learning how to do certain things. And on Street Trash, the melting effects required a lot of fooling around and experimenting with before they really looked right on film. We did, in the case of both films, we really did not do any tests of major effects, which is something I would avoid in the future.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's really surprising.
And on a film like that also, it throws a lot of extra time into your schedule. In a more or less normal movie where you're not forced to stay there for hours at a time to try and get effects that work correctly and keep redoing shots over and over again. That's a whole other aspect of filmmaking that normal people don't have to contend with. But it's, I think, it's the kind of work that's necessary to get the reactions that the film continues to get over the years. Street Trash specifically, but even with Spookies, that film was done at a time where there were a lot of films utilizing effects like that, mostly inspired by Gremlins, and then you had Ghoulies and like several others, especially from companies that specialized in that kind of stuff, where they were churning. Charles Band was turning out stuff by the barrel full at that time. And overall, compared with other movies done at that time, I think our effects are actually, for the most part, better. And I know stuff like Ghoulies had like a far bigger budget than we ever had. But somehow the stuff we did, it just looks better. It moves better. It looks less cheap.
Yeah, and you can always tell and appreciate, especially people who grew up in our generation, who appreciate the practical, real effects over CGI.
I think special effects, because CGI became so commonplace and people got so used to it, I think there's a real. I mean, I reached my saturation point years ago with CGI, but I think the mainstream audience is getting to that point also. Where they're aware when something is CGI. And they're also aware when something probably isn't CGI. And I think even if it's just subconsciously, I think the viewer knows, all right, this is much more impactful because I know somebody did this.
Yeah. So looking at your filmography, we got Spookies, we got Street Trash, and then it looks like we have a pretty long gap until more recently.
Yeah, that's because I spent years working in various other fields, and I spent an enormous amount of time still working with my Spookies partner, Tom Doran, trying to raise money for additional movies, and never really gave up, and had like endless projects come this close and just never quite coming together. I mean, Tom had a pet Scottish historical project he wanted to do. He was from Scotland, and he eventually came very close to it. A guy from Scotland got in touch with him. They came very close to doing a deal. He had a contract, and then he, at the last minute, after making it clear his only motivation in doing this was to direct this film, the backer or potential backer said, "Oh well, there's some hot young director I've been told that I should get," and at that point things just fell out of place.
So what advice, given all of the stuff that you've been through with productions happening, almost happening, what advice would you give young filmmakers starting out, particularly in horror films today?
Young or old or anybody, it's really a matter of, you just can't expect it to easily happen. You have to begin with, you have to be seriously willing to do work, to spend time, to be dedicated. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff half-assed and crappily, and some people make a career on that, but I don't think that's anything to aspire to, really. I think you have to want it enough to be willing to put up with the frustration involved, because even the most successful filmmakers either wind up at a certain point where things fall apart for them and they suddenly don't have the power they had and they can't really do what they were doing before. Or in some cases, I mean, people just many Hollywood filmmakers with names go through one project after another, just like I was talking about before, that it's almost financed and then it falls apart and then on to something else, and that repeats itself. And it's one of the things you have to put up with in the business.
Yeah. So I'm sitting here drinking some 1005 Viper now.
Oh, really? What's it like?
See what happens. Or New Amsterdam with a sticker on it, whatever you want to call it. So I just have a couple questions and then we'll wrap things up. So you were in Igor and the Lunatics.
Yes, that was all. Myself and my partners, Tom and Brendan from Spookies, got involved with that picture. It was shooting in Westchester County, near where we lived in New York State. And initially, they just started visiting the set as observers, and then started giving some advice because it was a first-time director and producer. And eventually, they were asked to direct like horror scenes because there were, despite the fact that it was supposedly a horror film, there were very little. There was very little in the way of horror elements in any of the script that was originally being done, and so they just, they just came onto it, and then I got invited to get involved, and I was the production manager on it for like a month or so.
I watched it for the first time this week, which is a trauma movie. I think, like I said earlier, like I love street trash. It's the most non-trauma movie I've ever seen in my life, and
All right,
that's
I will boast that I think it's far better made than any trauma movie.
Oh, you're not wrong. Like it's fantastic. Like I've probably watched it 6 times now, and it's something I've come to more recently. Like I probably saw it for the first time in the last 10 years. And as soon as I watched it, I'm like, I went and bought it. I'm like, I have to own this. Like and like John was like kind of touched on, there's something about it. I can't put my finger on it either.
I think I mean, part of what makes it different is that it's a horror movie, but it's also a comedy, and it's got like this tremendous energy. There's always something happening. There's always something new being introduced. There's always some other thing that comes out of nowhere with characters. I think it's genuinely entertaining.
Yeah.
Well, I think for people who can't handle a lot of what's depicted, it's genuinely upsetting to them. And nowadays, the film was considered tasteless when we made it, just because of the effects. And yeah, it's homeless people, whatever. But the homeless were packing the streets of New York back in the 80s when it was made. It was not really that far removed from reality. And nowadays, I mean, from younger people, I frequently hear the comment that it depicts the homeless in a poor light, and I agree, yeah, but it depicts everybody in the film in a poor light, pretty much.
Right. Yeah. So last question, then we'll close up. Between Spookies and Street Trash, which one are you more favorable towards? Like, which one do you have a bigger connection
By
to?
far, Street Trash, because even though I can't claim a writing or directing credit on it, I was like really, central to the whole production. I mean, I was there. I was one of the core group of people that every time we did a re-edit, that that my opinion was taken into account, and I mean, I really, and I was there on the film from the beginnings of talk about it, right, through the end of production and post-production and marketing and etc. So I feel like I was very personally involved, and what it came down to ultimately is I was more involved than I was allowed to be with Spookies or Twisted Souls as it started out, because we were at odds with a lot of aspects of what we were told we had to do to begin with. We constantly had new suggestions being thrown at us, which we usually managed to get rid of by saying, "Oh, are you going to pay for that?" And then he would forget about the thing he had just suggested. I think Street Trash ultimately comes off, definitely in a much higher at a much higher level than Spookies could. I mean, Spookies was just turned into an entirely different film. I was not crazy, and I've admitted this in the past, I was not crazy about our screenplay because we never got to do subsequent drafts. We worked from a first draft of Spookies, which is really not a good thing to do when you're making films. But we had so many other things to take care of to get into production that it never came up. And he wasn't complaining about it, so I guess we didn't get to it. But Street Trash was allowed to be sort of honed and polished. And I can't tell you how many times I watched various scenes and the entire film just on a moviola table with several people there reviewing stuff again and again and again to really determine what works, what doesn't work. Is this funny? Should we do something else? It really, a lot of effort was put into making it. I think the fact that it moves so fast and is. I feel it's the kind of film that even if you don't like it, you have to recognize some of the effort and creativity that goes into it. I mean, some people won't, but it's, to me, it's pretty much there. It's not the average film. It's better made than a lot of far more expensive films, I would say.
Yeah, and I just love like '80s New York backdrop films, like that grittiness, like that's part of the allure for street trash for me too.
Yeah, well, you got to realize back in '80s New York, it's like almost anywhere you went in New York City had that kind of atmosphere still. So it was not really hard to get a certain look. And we shot exteriors. I mean, we shot in the junkyard. A lot of the exteriors we shot were in the vicinity of that junkyard. Others were in Manhattan, in New Jersey. But I mean, there was a lot more rundown area and space at that time. I mean, there was quite a bit of abandoned area that no one was living in.
Yeah. And with Spookies too, like upon multiple viewings, you can kind of tell there were just too many hands trying to do too many things. And I hate that because what it
part
could
of
have
it is
been.
that the part of it is that the added material seems so forced in. It doesn't relate to anything that's actually going on. It's sort of just pushed into certain scenes in certain ways. And I think it becomes fairly obvious after a while you're watching.
Yeah, sadly. So, all right. So let's wrap things up. Be sure to go subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to wherever you're listening to this podcast. We have a playlist on Amazon Music. If you have that too, follow us on Instagram. Come back next week. I'm not sure what episode we're doing yet, but we'll figure it out. Frank, thank you again. And
I'm going to do my plug now because I'm working on Spookies 2, which is designed to make up for decades of inability to get film made.
Awesome. And when you get it done, please come back and tell us all about it.
I hope you'll hear about it. I'm intending to make a big noise about it in the coming year.
Nice. So do you have any other cons coming up at all?
I haven't booked anything yet. It took me a while just to get everything together to do this first convention. Between I created merchandise, I really wanted to do it right, etc. But I'm pretty much set. All I have to do is throw things into a suitcase, and I can start going to additional conventions. But I'm also making connections to various conventions and regions of the country. I'm trying to get a rep for this kind of thing because it's become bigger and bigger business through the years.
Oh yeah.
So one thing at a time. It's like, unfortunately now I need a staff of 6 people, and I only have myself, and I have a partner, Dave Williamson, who's working with me. But there's only so much that you can do if you're so many people.
Yeah, that's true. We love Orbit DVD. I've been there several times. I'll actually be there in about 2 weeks. So
terrific. Yeah, I mean, tell them you talk to me, because I mean I really enjoyed the place. The whole staff was just really beautiful. I think I wish there was a video store equivalent to that in almost every town in America. And I don't understand how, because when I was there, even they seemed to be doing a reasonable amount of in-store business, and and the fact is the store was far bigger than I expected it to be. So I don't know what could be done to make every city in the country be able to sustain that kind of an establishment.
Yeah, it would be awesome. We recently have gotten one close to us. Our buddy Jesse Butler opened up Danger Zone Video, which is very similar. He focuses a little bit more on VHS, but it still has that same vibe. And it's nice that it's like 20 minutes away from me, because Orbit is not 20 minutes away from Nashville, unfortunately. And which is good, because I would be broke constantly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I understand.
All right. So that's it for this episode. I'm Jay with Frank, John, and TJ. And until
Thanks for
next
having
time,
me.
Keep it spooky. See what I did there?
So